English translation 540th contact. Saturday, the 19th of May, 2012, 14:33 hours.
Greetings again, dear girl. I am delighted that you have once again done the correction work with Bernadette and me today, and that you are now also expecting me in the office. Actually, I was expecting Ta, because I had prepared some questions that I wanted to have answered by him. But of course, I am also very happy about your visit.
It is also a pleasure for me, but unfortunately, I can only be here for a short time, because I have to leave in a few minutes because I have to attend to my other duties. You will be happy about Patara's visit after all, because he was late today due to an activity, so I took over the correction work for him.
Ah, so he is coming after all.
Of course. And the reason why I am still visiting you after the correction work is that I want to ask you privately for advice, as I also told Pata.
I can also say that this is also a matter of course, and that it is an honor for me to be able to give you advice.
But it is really private.
Also a matter of course.
Allow me to put it this way. Plus, the fact that... And what else I noticed is that, and how am I supposed to behave with regard to all this? If you want to give me advice on this, I want to be grateful to you.
Of course, but first I would like to take some time to answer before I prepare an answer that can also be of use to you. So first of all, a question about the names you mentioned. If you want to go into them first, may I use them for our name book, also the female names, and may I also find out the meanings and the letter stress for them, which I then mark underlined when taking in and writing down the conversation? While you give me the answers, I can let your request go through my thoughts and feelings a little more.
Of course, Urmasan means the bear keeper. Urmasana is the female name and means the bear keeper. Urasanian means Lord of the Bears. Urasanya means Lady of the Bears. Torian is called Lord of Kindness, and Toriana is called Lady of Kindness, while Orden means the Great Wise One, and Ordana, of course, means the Great Wise One.
Thanks. And as for your extensive question, I understand it very much, because I too was once in similar distress and would have needed good advice. Unfortunately, at that time there was nobody with whom I could have discussed the matter, so I had to give myself good advice, which was also correct. So, according to my situation at the time, I want to give the same advice that I gave myself, and also followed it, which has put everything right.
Thanks. So I will attempt to process everything in the way that you...
Oh, hello, Pta. Welcome, dear friend.
Am I intruding at the moment? Greetings, dear friend. Of course, I can leave again if you have not finished your private conversation.
That is not necessary, because everything has already been cleared up, and I have received very good advice, which I will also follow. Many thanks, dear advising friend. Your advice helps me a lot. But now, I want to leave. Goodbye. But allow me, but now really goodbye.
And she is gone. Excuse me.
You do not have a chance, and you just have to put up with it.
I realize, my friend, I realize. Look here, with this I want to come back to the matter of light eating, which we talked about on the 1st of May. Franco Cellini asked a question about why you and I had a conversation about it. In the meantime, a certain Kei Gauchi also asked me by telephone to say something about the absurdity of the alleged light eating in a bulletin. The same man also asked me about esotericism and so-called prophecy books. So I have now written something about the subject of light eating, esotericism and prophecy books in Special Bulletin number 68, August 2012, which I would like to give you to read.
Should it be right away or after our conversation?
In a moment. It is probably best if you also take a look at the relevant questions. Hans Georg also wants to write an article about the light eating, which he wants to bring to me for the bulletin today.
Then I want to read it, after which you should also attach it to our conversation when you call it up. And if Hans Georg also writes something on this subject, then it is probably correct that this article should also be added. And so that the whole thing has its correctness, I will then also read it in connection with our conversation on this matter. If you record it on the computer, then I can retrieve it from there and record it with our technology.
Sure, but look here in the computer. You can read it already concerning the corresponding questions and my answers.
Thanks.
Ta reads.
Reader's question. Recently, I have received from a friend several books of esoteric content, including those dealing with the so-called light nutrition and with ancient and modern prophecies. Among the books with prophecies is one author in particular, Manfred Dimde, who lists prophecies for the future from so-called Nostradamus books. What is to be thought of all these books and their contents? And what is esotericism in general? And what about the light nutrition and the assertions about it, which seem to me to be extremely suspect? K. Gauci, Switzerland.
Answer regarding books of prophecy, I cannot express any opinion, because such are completely unknown to me. Although their existence is known to me through advertising material for books, I have never been interested in them, and have also not obtained any. Basically, I am not interested in such writings, because since my childhood, through the Plejachen and through the memory banks of the Nocademian, I have had better possibilities for the preservation of prophecies, as well as for predictions, which have been fulfilled without exception. This is in contrast to so-called prophecies, which I have heard on various occasions during my life through esotericists and religious sectarian delusional believers, and which have not been fulfilled, or only supposedly so, because they are based on illusions. Divine inspirations and phantasms, etc., they were not or only allegedly fulfilled, because they were only based on illusions. Divine inspirations and fantasies, etc., of any would-be prophets and of so-called seers, and whose statements respectively prophecies had been very ambiguous and also confused beyond recognition since time immemorial with regard to their interpretation. And this was very often the case, and according to the statements of the Plejachen, has also been preserved to the present day, and it will continue to be so in the future. A Wolfgang Froese from Germany, however, once sent me a book of prophecy by mail, as he wrote to me, but I never received it because it was obviously lost in the mail. And concerning this author Manfred Dimde, who lists prophecies from Nostradamus books, as you mention, both this man and his book are unknown to me. As far as Michel Nostradamus is concerned, however, I can say that in the 1990s I was somewhat involved with it, but it did not bring me much, so there is also no new or valuable knowledge. But what can be said about esotericism, which has masses of followers, is this: esotericism has become a worldwide boom, with unbelievably stupid conspiracy and apocalypse theories based on absolutely unrealistic nonsense and frighteningly misguided claims. Esotericism is also based on a profound religious sectarian delusion that nips all the impulses of reason in the bud. The term esotericism has always been understood as secret knowledge or a secret teaching, which has been vehemently hidden from outsiders, respectively from the so-called common people. In the modern age, which began in 1844 with the astrological age of Aquarius, the so-called New Age movement or New Age movement, respectively, which claims that its aim is to expand the consciousness of as many human beings as possible, has been formed. If the human beings of all walks of life and professions would commit themselves to this goal, the age of the new spirituality could begin. In the language of the esotericists, esotericism therefore means the way inward, and thus a path that should bring the individual human being self-knowledge and self-discovery, as well as self-realization. which should be a special experience for the human beings. The fact that this nonsense is still connected with a religious sectarian delusion only rounds off the whole thing. And with all this, it must be said that esotericism does not teach anything of the spiritual teaching with one iota, and also does not show how and what is to be done so that the human being can find himself in self-knowledge and realize himself and become a true and worthy human being in his senses and aspirations, as it is given in relation to the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, as it was already created in primeval times by the universal prophet Nocedemion, according to the laws and recommendations of creation. Billy?
Readers question opinion. By watching the supporting film on the internet, In the Beginning There Was Light, I came across this absurd and deadly nutritional philosophy of the so-called light nutrition process. Several human beings have already died from this diet, and more will surely follow. What do you know about this respectively? Can you tell us something about its origin and development? A warning should be published in the bulletin about these light eaters. Franco Cellini, Switzerland.
Answer. The nonsense of the light eating can be traced back to the Australian Ellen Grieve alias Jasmuheen parents were Norwegians, who wrote a book, Light Nutrition, and as an alleged medium has worldwide followers despite her controversial nature and irresponsibly feeds them with her esoteric nonsense. This also applies to the light-eating teaching, which is repeatedly tried to be practiced by its believers worldwide in order to put it into practice, often with serious consequences that are harmful to health and ultimately result in death by starvation and thirst. This alone is the truth. Even if people all over the world appear again and again as swindlers and claim that they have been in a permanent state of fasting for weeks, months or even years and therefore would no longer eat any solid respectively material food, but only cosmic light and divine energy, called prana, see Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky, and according to the dictionary Esoteric Philosophy by Gottfried von Parucker, the principle of life, the breath of life. What this is really about, respectively what it should be, cannot be defined, but how can it be different in case of nonsense? So the explanation is simply that the cosmic light is transformed into divine energy, and thus the effect of a transformation to a higher consciousness and even to a higher being arises. The esoteric, sectarian and life-threatening nonsense that the path leads via the light nutrition, according to which no more solid and liquid food has to be eaten and drunk, is misconstrued. And unfortunately there are many esoteric sectarian blind people who believe this nonsense and risk their health and even their lives. The origin of the so-called light nutrition process is purely esoteric ideological, with religious and sectarian esoteric beliefs, and the astrological age of Aquarius playing a major role. The Earth entered this age in 1844 and is being exploited for the benefit of its innocent believers by the creation of unfair horoscopes and by esotericists with their nonsense of faith. According to the celestial circle, which is astrologically divided into 12 constellations, the Earth has entered the constellation of Aquarius, but that the human being of the Earth is thus freed from all his wicked evils and is transformed into a higher and more spiritual being, is probably the last esoteric nonsense that has ever been produced on the Earth and even in the entire universe. And that this can be achieved in a fast way, and that a structural gene DNA change can be brought about by eating only cosmic light and transforming it into nourishing divine energy in the human beings, is the most bottomless and irresponsible nonsense that has ever escaped from a human brain. But because the nonsense of religions and sectarianism still plays a part in the whole of esotericism, it can also be made clear to the believers in esotericism that the whole process of transformation, respectively transformation into a higher and even divine being, can only be implemented if the human beings only feed on cosmic light and thus on divine energy. Through this light nutrition process, it is claimed that the pituitary gland continues to grow, whereby a genetic change then leads to a structural DNA expansion by 10 additional strands. This is supposed to lead to the human beings becoming supernatural and even a divine being who feeds solely on cosmic light and thus on divine energy, which contains all the nutrients, etc., that are necessary for life. In response to your question opinion, on the 1st of May 2012, during a conversation with Patar, I asked him for his opinion regarding the light eating, because there is still a lot to be said about it, but that would fill a whole book. What came out of the conversation is this. Billy.
Excerpt from the 539th Official Contact Conversation, Tuesday, the 1st of May, 2012.
Then a question regarding the so-called light nutrition, which we have already talked about in private on several occasions. Again and again, some Earthlings get the crazy idea that they can only feed on light, and then of course slowly starve, die of thirst, and finally die. Such a case has now happened again, because certain human beings on Earth are unteachable in this respect, that the whole thing is a complete nonsense of pathologically stupid religious sectarians who move mainly in esoteric circles. There are even such morbidly stupid ones who attend light nutrition seminars, which are organized for them by profiteers, and who take the money they have earned out of their pockets. Unfortunately, the stupid and the faithful do not die out. And it is unbelievable what kind of feeble-mindedness is being spread on the internet regarding the alleged light eating. Just search in Google under light nutrition, and you will find the craziest light eaters and their bottomless claims, scams, lies, and shenanigans.
The so-called light nutrition actually corresponds to an absolute nonsense, or just bullshit, as you say. In the whole universe, there is neither the human beings nor any other material life form that could feed on light, for each one needs a specific material nutrition, even all microorganisms of all kinds. In relation to the human beings alone, they need solid and liquid food and healing substances, which they cannot replace by anything else in order to maintain the biological and medical metabolism. Note, Billy = metabolism. If the human being does not eat and does not drink, he inevitably dies of starvation and thirst, which may be associated with various kinds of suffering and pain, but ultimately also with hallucinations and affective delusions. This is not just about money, it is about the lives of bona fide people. Complete abstinence from food and drink is absolutely deadly for every human being. However, if someone claims to be able to control the light eating and to live only on light, then he can no longer be considered fully sane in terms of his mind and reason. And if someone nevertheless claims to master this naturally impossible and absolutely deadly method, he is not dealing with the truth, but with untruth. If in this respect the human beings who are faithfully decayed are also taught the nonsense of eating light through seminars, then the seminar leaders are guilty of murder or killing as perpetrators or as helpers. If seminar participants die by imitating the fact that they can live without solid food and without drinking, but only by eating light.
Not even a spirit form can feed on light, for since it is spirit energetic in nature, it requires the cosmic electromagnetic and spiritual energetic life energy as its food. Some religiously, sectarian and esoterically inspired fanatics and believers claim time and again that some saints or God-blessed, etc., such as the allegedly stigmatized and dubious Therese Neumann, called Racy von Connersreuth, etc., who died on the 18th of September 1962 in the last century, had not taken any drink or food for months or even years. But as your father Svath, your daughter Simyase and Quetzal, and you have already explained, this is only based on deceit, lies, and deception because these alleged light eaters secretly took food and drink, even when alleged witnesses claimed and still claim the opposite.
What you say is correct to a large extent, for it is indeed the case that all allegations are nothing but fraud. lies, deceit, and trickery when the human beings claimed or still claim that as light nutrition, they have eaten or would eat their life with light food alone. And also the statements of witnesses who have observed and confirmed an alleged light eating of some light-feeding people over a long period of time fall into the same frame of untruth, because either such lies are spread consciously, or the witnesses were and are deceived by the so-called light eaters through swindling and trickery, etc. The origin of the alleged light eating is indeed, as you say, found among religious, sectarian and esoteric unscrupulous fanatics, delusional believers and confused phantoms, etc. And as far as Therese Neumann von Konnersreuth is concerned, I am well aware of the matter. It is to be said that the whole thing was a swindle, which in principle was only made correct by the religious fanaticism of a priest named Joseph Neber. However, this was not so much because the woman allegedly did not eat or drink, but because the suggestions of the pastor, who suffered from a mania for help, caused a delusion of suffering in the woman, who had fallen victim to religious sectarian hysteria, which made her widely known as an alleged stigmatized person. In truth, all her suffering was no more than a medical and psychopsychiatric problem, as is the case with all cases of stigmatization, but also with a so-called possession.
Light food, cult, esoteric delusion and its consequences. With the tragic death of a Swiss woman who believed in esotericism in the winter of 2011, the theme of light food, respectively prainerism, breatharianism became topical again. She was of the rock-solid opinion that she would finally find answers to her esoteric questions in the so-called light nutrition. In the end, the mother of adult children starved to death during the light nutrition fasting cure. On 25.4, 2012, the Zurich newspaper Tages-Anzeiger reported in detail about this human tragedy. Having become known in the esoteric movement at the beginning of the 1990s, light food had been somewhat forgotten for some years. Even the former founder of the movement and author of books on the subject, Ellen Greve, an Australian esotericist, has relativized her original statements in the book after several deaths among her believers who did not survive the light nutrition fasting cure. Her dubious teachings state that after a 21-day fasting process, no more coarse biological food needs to be taken in, after which the body will only feed on so-called prana. Sanskrit M. Prana, breath of life, breath of life. In Hinduism, life force or life energy. The Tibetan teaching speaks of lung. In ancient China known as qi and in Japan as ki. Based on the esoteric delusional belief in light nutrition, the body is completely denied the supply of liquid and solid food during the first 21 days. The life-threatening false teaching says that the body changes to higher things through this process and does not need any solid food after only 1 month. Contrary to the actual assertion that the body feeds on light nutrition, however, light cannot be eaten in any way. According to Greve's theory, the body organs intended for this purpose are obviously superfluous, and the body is supposedly flooded directly with prana energy. The truth is, however, that this is a dangerous and compulsive form of self-imposed refusal to eat. From one moment to the next, one's own carnal material body is forced to forcibly stop its creational natural conditions of life and functional basis. This inevitably leads to stress reactions in the human body. It goes without saying that light has an undisputed influence on the human body. For example, the hormone melatonin, which lies under the skin, produces the vital vitamin D when there is sufficient sunlight. According to specialist literature, melatonin is a hormone that is produced from serotonin by the pinealocytes in the pineal gland epiphysis, a part of the diencephalon, and controls the day-night rhythm of the human body. Vitamin D is responsible for maintaining a wide range of body functions. However, these processes never justify the untenable theory that the human body is completely nourished by light. No higher scientific knowledge is required to establish, in a short self-experiment, that when the body withdraws fluids, it will alert the body to its deficiencies after a short period of dehydration symptoms and will urgently require water. In order to substantiate and justify this forcible food deprivation fasting cure, Indian yogis and fakirs are often cited as examples in the esoteric movement of light nutrition. So-called saints are also mentioned, who are worshipped and revered by Christian human beings for their supposedly ascetic way of life. In fact, such claims and comparisons do not stand up to any long-term tests of the test persons, because such tests have never really been carried out for years, or the experiments failed after a short time. On the one hand, this is because the supposedly saints died centuries ago and the data are based solely on the wishes of the delusional believers who were blinded by cult religion. On the other hand, also because the claim of an Indian guru to have abstained from food for 60 years, for example, can no longer be traced back meticulously and is only based on unreliable or cult-religiously influenced statements. Such a proof is neither logical nor scientifically tenable and therefore unobjective, non-binding, and extremely dubious. It merely corresponds to a naive, deluded, and euphemistic self-affirmation of the person concerned, for the ecstatic concealment of their own esoteric delusion. Driven by their own esotericism fanaticism, the clear danger signs and physical symptoms are deliberately ignored, and their own existence is brought to inevitable ruin with open eyes. In the series of numerous and highly bizarre cult esoteric fallacies, that of the alleged light nutrition takes a particularly peculiar position. As a rule, sectarian or esoteric nonsense teachings mistreat the consciousness, thoughts, feelings, and psyche to the utmost. In the case of the esoteric delusional disease of deliberately planned dehydration and starvation, the human beings are faced with the inevitable death of the human beings. From a human point of view, such a heresy already borders on criminal irresponsibility. In a life-hazardous and life-threatening way, it plays a ruthless Russian roulette with the life and limb of the insane esoteric believers. Once again, the human being's understandable search for meaning is a life-threatening shambling to the highest degree. The senseless and avoidable loss of one's own life, however, is in its finality always an indescribable catastrophe. The human body, or rather the physical metabolism, is basically dependent on a supply of material food or energy. There is no doubt about this fact, because it corresponds to a creational natural principle and an evolutionary development process that has been going on for billions of years. There is no other way to explain the numerous physical metabolic processes. Everything in the human body is designed to absorb, transform, exchange energy, and excrete decomposed substances, which is clearly evident in the functioning of the stomach, liver, kidneys, and intestines, etc., not to mention the existence of the mouth, the teeth, and the taste receptors on the tongue, as well as the highly complex swallowing mechanism that transports the substances into the body. For billions of years, the creative universal consciousness has put a great deal of effort into establishing this creative natural system in all possible Omadam life forms of world space. Obviously, Earth humans were not intended for photosynthesis, and for this reason were not equipped with the necessary chloroplasts, etc. Ultimately, the quality and quantity of food and individual eating habits determine the physical health and general well-being of the human beings. If the esoteric theory of light nutrition were true, the nutritional problem of overpopulation could be solved from one moment to the next. The universe-wide history of the development of mankind and civilizations would therefore have to be rewritten. For billions of years, the human beings have been created in myriad forms by the impulsive creation on the most diverse worlds in the vastness of the universe. The principle of the material food supply into the material protoplasmic or cytoplasmic bodies and cells corresponds to a creational natural law of the universe. Only the esoteric presumption and assumption that the light nutrition has obviously remained undiscovered until our presence on this planet shows the horrendous illogicality of this nonsense. This Earth humans and cult esoteric counter-theory to the creational natural laws and recommendations is therefore indescribably ridiculous in its megalomania. The esoteric fallacy of the light nutrition proves once again clearly and unambiguously how much the human beings can struggle to bring their own rational and intellectual thinking to the ground in order to realize their confused delusions and unrealistic imaginations. With the power of their own thoughts, the human beings concerned prevent themselves from actively recognizing the clear and logical signs of a life-threatening threat to their body and life. Physical warnings and thought islands of clarity are tragically thrown to the wind as touchstones of failure and one's own unsuitability for supposed enlightenment. Blinded by false cult, religious, or esoteric promises, the human beings allow themselves to be led astray, open-eyed and suggestively convinced of correctness of their wrong path. The self-conceit of one's own rational thinking is a highly interesting, but at the same time also an extremely tragic psychological phenomenon. In the case of the light nutrition fasting cure, this automatically leads to a very rapid reduction in the brain's energy potential. It goes on the back burner and many vital functions are suppressed. With a lower energy level, the human beings find it incredibly difficult to cope with everyday physical, private, and social challenges. Sensible regulation or the conscious decision to abandon a life-threatening project is massively impaired and made more difficult without outside help. Herein lies another tragedy of this light nutrition fasting cure. Not infrequently, the condition of incapacity is diagnosed as depression, as a result of which the human beings lose all drive and lust for life. In his daily work, the author of this article witnesses daily the misuse of the powers of thought and consciousness, which can ultimately manifest itself in a serious mental illness. Delusional and obsessive-compulsive illnesses are becoming more and more prevalent in our society, regardless of whether it is a matter of dependence on a cult religion, an esoteric belief, or any other sect. The symptoms of religious disease are all very similar. Delusional illness and blind fanaticism as a result of wrong thoughts and considerations ultimately lead to the destruction of one's own personality, even if it may take decades. A consistent and compulsive implementation of the light nutrition fasting cure inevitably leads to death and is in its final consequence equivalent to a temporary suicide by starvation and thirst. Hans-Georg Lanzendorfer.
Good, I will do as you say. Then, however, I have here one more question on account of the Earth's magnetism, which for a long time already should become increasingly weaker. Can you tell me the reason for this?
The expected weaker Earth magnetism is connected with the magnetic Earth polarity reversal, which the last time had taken place about 700,000 years ago. With the Earth, a magnetic Earth polarity reversal repeats itself in each case over a period of approximately 500,000 years, although depending on the circumstances, it can also take up to 900,000 years. A continuous decreasing and hence a change in the Earth's magnetic field indicates that a renewed Earth polarity reversal is looming. This means that ultimately the magnetic field wanders and brings about a polarity reversal. As a result, under certain circumstances, a brief magnetic breakdown can take place, when in a reverse polarity-wise the whole thing newly builds up. And since the Earth's magnetism is not equally strong everywhere on the planet and magnetism fluctuations appear, that can have negative consequences in many connections. Thus, the weakening geomagnetism also has a certain influence on the cloud formations in the Ys that they lose altitude, condense more and move closer above the Earth's surface, whereby the lightning activity becomes more dangerous down below. Nevertheless, a lowering of the cloud cover has a small benefit, however, because through that the greenhouse effect is somewhat diminished, because more rays of the sun are reflected. A disturbing influence takes place. For example, with regard to the movements of the Earth's petroleum lakes located in the interior of the planet, as enormous masses of water also located in the interior of the Earth will, however, move in equal measure, which would bedeck the whole Earth kilometers high, would they penetrate to the outside. All these simultaneous movements, which certain geological changes on and in the planet bring about, have various effects, biologically speaking, for the living creatures in the Earth's underground as well as on the Earth's surface, in the waters and in the air.
Interesting. You should explain more to me about this sometime. But the whole thing also means that the Earth is heading for a magnetic Earth polarity reversal. To my knowledge, that process really runs, since the magnetic North Pole already wanders and is currently in Greenland. In any case, your daughter Sim Yase already said this in 1977.
That is correct.
Since you are saying that negative consequences emerge in many connections through the fluctuating Earth magnetism, that gives me an idea. On several occasions, Sim Yase, Quetzal, you and I have spoken about the fact that whole herds of fish, whales, dolphins, sea dogs, and seals, etc., move away from their actual ancestral places in the sea towards other places or throw themselves on beaches and miserably perish. The same also happens on the land, as animals and creatures as well as birds plunge to their death over rocks or cliffs. Unfortunately, we have spoken briefly only once or twice officially and otherwise only more privately about that, and also only with regard to the fact that through Earth magnetic geomagnetic disturbances, strong radio waves as well as through noise pollution from ships in the seas, as well as through dropping bombs, gunfire, explosions, and through other man-made disturbances, the animal, creature, bird, poultry, fish, amphibian, and insect worlds are driven into panic. Now the thought comes to me that along with those human-induced catastrophes of the Earth, perhaps also the Earth's magnetism could play a big role concerning situations where whole herds of whales, dolphins, seals, and fish move themselves to other places or throw themselves on the coastal beaches and miserably perish. As also herds of animals and creatures or birds seek death en masse, throwing themselves over cliffs and rocks and plunging to their deaths. For a long time, the scientists puzzle over the reasons for this, but they find no explanations for it.
In fact, you have spoken about this phenomena with my daughter and with Quetzal as well as with me. The two of us spoke about this in the years 1993 and 1995, wherein you had already mentioned magnetic disturbances, but had otherwise well understood, not as the Earth's magnetism, but rather as magnetic disturbances of a technical nature, such as those produced by the human beings of Earth. And as for your assumption that geomagnetic disturbances may be the origin of the whole thing, meets the actual facts, and indeed to such a large extent that all the disturbances which are caused by the Earth humans falls in weight to only about 20%. The origin of it all lies in the changing strengths and displacements of the Earth's magnetism, which finds itself in a strong shift to the downside, and during the last 150 years, the change in its strength has already weakened by around 10%. This decrease happens still further, and indeed with around 6% per century.
Aha! Your answer creates the possibility of calculating when the polarity reversal will take place. That is to say, when the North Pole will be there, where the South Pole is now, and the other way round. Sim Yase already told me in the 1970s that in about 1,000 years the magnetic North Pole, which today is in Greenland, will take its point there, where Mecca is today. Well, if it is, then so be it. And what you say with regard to the magnetic disturbances, which I mentioned earlier, so you no doubt rightly lie. Because back then I had not yet brought the whole thing in connection with the Earth's magnetic geomagnetic fluctuations, which however is now the case according to your explanations.
246th Contact, the 19th of June, 1993, Volume 7, page 192, sentence 136.
Strong radio wave transmitters can damage all kinds of life forms at very long distances, including adult trees and elephants as well as whales when they are hit by radio waves.
252nd Contact, the 14th of February, 1995, Volume 7, page 401, after sentence 180 tar.
Another question. Animals, and more rarely the human beings, are often misled by magnetic disturbances, both on land and in the water as well as in the air. We have discussed this before. But afterwards you said that animals are also affected by a very dangerous other factor. Unfortunately, you explained this outside the contact conversation, which is why none of this was written down. If I understood correctly, you explained that the animals would also be affected by the so-called noise pollution to the point of death, if they were restrained by low or high-pitched tones that are inaudible to the human beings and that affect their own low or high-pitched tones, which they need for navigation. All other tones and sounds of all kinds produced by the human beings are also capable of disturbing the animals in their navigation, because these tones and sounds, etc., overlay those low or high tones which are emitted for navigation purposes or for communication between themselves. However, if these navigation sounds are overlaid by noise, as happens through the fault of the human beings, for example by ship engines and ship propellers as well as by aircraft engines and jet engines or by other engines of all kinds, by explosions and machine noise and by other multifarious noise sources which produce certain disturbing sound waves, then the animal navigation system is disturbed in such a way that, for example, sea animals become stranded or land animals throw themselves en masse over cliffs, etc., into abysses. Such murderous noise sources also include bomb tests of all kinds, bomb droppings and gunfire, etc., for certain species of animals. However, in addition to noise pollution, radio waves are also harmful or even fatal. Just as radio waves are harmful to the human beings, as are strong electromagnetic waves emitted by power lines and transformer stations, etc. However, there is also the so-called normal electrosmog. Have I explained all this correctly?
Of course you can do that.
Okay, I will. The whole thing is simply regrettable that the people are unknowing in these things and are not really informed about the facts, which is also why no action is undertaken by them. On the other hand, however, it is also so that the majority of the people are indifferent and even takes no action when he or she is informed, because self-initiative with regard to the world, the fellow human being, the fauna and flora as well as the nature and the planet is foreign to him or her, has but gotten out of the control of the good nature in relation to their own needs. Generally, however, the people are kept unknowing quite consciously, because the more unknowing and knowledge-based dumber the human beings are, the easier they can be exploited, controlled, subjugated, and treated as fools, and indeed both by religions and sects. That is to say, their representatives and gurus, as well as by multinational corporations, scientists, conglomerates, diverse organizations, and above all, by public authorities and governments.
This is a heavy and a true word, but many will not rejoice over this and will again preserve hostilities towards you. In any case, with that, you certainly make yourself not so many friends, particularly even when you...
You mean if I represent this also of the public?
This I wanted to say, but you had clearly understood it before I could express it.
It was also not difficult to catch your thoughts and to understand they were loud enough, yes. With what I said, I am not out to make myself many friends. Certainly, however, there will be some who give me their friendship, but to gain these, it must also be taken into account that enemies arise as well. The truth is that whosoever wants to gain friends, along the way many adversaries always emerge, who turn out to be evil fiends. These, however, are lurking everywhere with lies and deceptions, as well as slanders and falsifications and intrigues. This I have experienced well enough in my life thus far, even within my own family, but that could and will never stop me from fulfilling my mission. Therefore, as always, I appear openly and speak what there is to talk about and what has to be said. My maxim has been and always will be not to hide myself in a fortress or in a cave, etc., and not to isolate myself from the public with regard to the teaching and mission. Would I not hold to this so, I would then create an isolation against the mission and the teaching, through which entirely all life-essential information for the humans of the earth would be blocked. The might potential of my enemies with their lies and calumnies, as well as with their childish criticism and so forth, is great, and that they are numerous, and I am repeatedly the target of their crummy attacks. This is undeniable. Nevertheless, however, I will not be deterred. It is my understanding that my enemies are humans which kick all the rules of social coexistence into the dirt and believe themselves powerful. Just as friends need good interpersonal relationships, honest love and like-minded ones, fiends, for their infamous machinations, their hate as well as their lies, swindles and calumnies, need their enslaved allies with rotten character and a selfishness, deviousness and unhonesty, etc., having gotten out of the control of the good nature. All these fiends that work against me do not understand the honesty that I must have and must maintain in order to disseminate the teaching and to fulfill the mission. They are absolutely incapable of comprehending how solitary, hard and rocky is the road which must be taken in the honesty and the modesty among the people on this earth, and they haven't one iota of a clue as to the efforts which are connected with everything. But in their unhonesty, lying, cheating, and slandering, they cannot and will not comprehend the whole thing, because would they do that and thereby understand everything? Then they would destroy the effects of their dirty deeds, intrigues, and their imagined positions of power, and leave them to be alarmingly small and insignificant.
For this I must say no more, for each additional word would be too much.
Sometimes it just comes over me, and then I have to speak up.
Which is also good, and the truth should also be told openly. My remark that you have to expect hostility was probably a little thoughtless.
I do not want to say that, because the way I see it, I was encouraged to empty my goiter a little.
If you look at it that way,
I do, yes.
then I want to go back to my other duties. As usual, Florina and Anjana are keeping the connection with you, so you can reach me through them.
Thanks. It is always a pleasure for me when they come here together or separately. However, our conversations are not called up by me and therefore not recorded. The whole thing would simply lead too far, and besides, we only talk together about purely personal things.
That is also correct. But now, goodbye, dear friend.